All right, this is Psychology, Chapter 2, Psychological Methods. Section 1, Conducting Research. We're going to talk about conducting research today. In the 17th century, René Descartes, he was a French thinker, and wrote the book Meditations on the First Philosophy. It helped to develop the scientific method. For Descartes, the body was matter, and the mind was spirit. So your mind, to him, was not of this world. The question was, how did the two interact? He argued that the mind and the body influence one another through the pineal gland, a small organ in the brain. And he thought that all sensations that needed to be combined to be processed, such as separate images from the eye, came together in the pineal gland. Thus, the pineal gland was a kind of a third eye in the brain. But many years later, the very scientific method that Descartes helped to create provided the means to disprove his theory. But in spite of his faulty pineal gland theory, Descartes can be credited with helping psychology become a real science because he helped develop this method called the scientific research. I'm sure you guys have heard of this before. Psychology, like chemistry and biology, is like an experimental science. It's an experimental science, just like chemistry and biology. Psychology is an experimental science. Therefore, assumptions such as about the behavior of chemical compounds, cells, or people must be supported by evidence. You have to back it up with evidence. It's not enough to argue that something is true just because someone says it is. Kind of like what our current president, Donald Trump, always does. Psychologists and other sciences make their business to be skeptical of claims that lack scientific evidence. Now, if you remember what skepticism is, that means not everything, you believe that nothing is true until it's proven. Psychologists use a variety of research methods to study behavior, mental processes. These methods differ, but psychologists tend to follow the same general procedure when conducting their research. This procedure consists of 6 steps: forming a research question, forming a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, analyzing the results, drawing conclusions, and forming a theory. That is the psychological method. That's the scientific method, sorry. Forming a research question. Psychologists begin a study by forming a research question. Many research questions arise from daily experience. Aggressiveness, for example, or anxiety are experienced by everyone, but they are psychological constructs. So it can be assumed that they are present, but they cannot be measured directly. So you can't see these things. You can't see anxiety. I might be feeling anxious. I might be feeling nervous. I might be feeling aggressive, but you can't see that. Therefore, research questions are the best directed towards the behavior. So scientists, for example, might decide to observe the behavior of fighting fish in order to study aggression. By creating the right conditions, such scientists are able to observe fish and how they react to changes in their environment. Similarity, psychologists bring animals and people into the laboratory environments where they can observe them under careful, controlled conditions. Other times, psychologists study behavior of organisms in the field, that is, where the organisms live naturally. In addition, psychologists sometimes get information by conducting experiments. Other questions arise out of psychological theory. According to social learning theorists, for example, people learn by observing others. Just like this gentleman over to the left is watching some people play croquet or something. I learn by observing others when I'm trying to learn a new trick at the skate park. I tend to watch other people land that trick. I'm like, oh, where's he putting his foot? How is he controlling his body? How is he centering his body? I learn through the power of the observation. So that's how I learn the best, through observing others. And then I try it myself, and then I'm like, hey, I can do this too. Okay, forming a hypothesis. After a psychologist asks a research question, they form a hypothesis about the answer. A hypothesis is an educated guess. this could be important. Remember that. A hypothesis is an educated guess. The accuracy of a hypothesis can be tested by research. So, if you have an educated guess, you can test it by researching this guess. Because psychology is a science, psychological knowledge rests on careful, examined human experience. No matter how good a hypothesis sounds, no matter how many people believe a hypothesis, it cannot be considered to be correct until it has been scientifically tested and proven to be right. Psychologists do not rely on people's opinions. Instead, they examine the evidence and draw their conclusions based upon the evidence. Okay, after psychologists have tested their hypothesis, they analyze their results. So whatever they have gathered in their research, they're going to analyze it. And sometimes this takes weeks, months, or even years. And after they analyze their results, they draw conclusions about their question and their hypothesis. And psychologists need to keep an open mind while they're conducting research, because they might think one thing, and then when they do the study, they might realize something else. All right, so after that, after they have received their findings, and their findings of a study have been confirmed, the study must be replicated, so it must be done again. It must be repeated. The study must be repeated, and it must produce the same results as before in order to reach their conclusion. Sometimes researchers repeat the study by using a different set of participants. That's a good way of redoing a study, because it might go differently with different people. So after you do all that research and you have all this data and you conducted the experiment multiple times on multiple people, you might actually come up with new questions that lead into a whole new study. So maybe it's a never-ending process, or you might come up with a conclusion. I know this is all very confusing stuff, but that is your lesson for today. So doing a little bit of review, scientific research consists of 5 basic steps: forming a research question, forming a hypothesis, or an educated guess, testing the hypothesis, analyzing the results, and drawing conclusions. After the 5 steps are completed, scientists and psychologists attempt to replicate the results and often ask new questions based upon those results. That is your lesson for today. Hope you learned something. I know it was confusing. Peace out.